Hi everyone, and welcome to Parent and Teacher Working Together. I'm really glad to have you here with me today. Today we're going to be talking about autism, and we have a very special lady. Her name is Kay Morgan-Gurr. I call her the lady with the many hats. She was at our last Teach Me to Teach conference last year in October, and she will be the one sharing about autism. So please get your paper, your pen, your notebook ready, and let's learn together. Enjoy. Well, welcome everyone to Parents and Teachers Working Together, and I'm so glad to have Kay Morgan-Gurr with us today. And we met for the first time when I invited you to our Teach Me to Teach conference way back in October last year, and you put on a splendid program on engaging how to engage parents and teachers with puppetry, wasn't it? Oh, it was excellent. I think I got a lot of positive feedback from that.
Good.
And thank you very much. And now you're here with us today on the topic about autism.
Yes. I am indeed.
Yeah. Do you want to just tell us a bit about yourself before we start?
I used to be a nurse.
Oh, okay.
I chose nursing because I felt as a child God was calling me into working with children that had disabilities and additional needs. Because I worked on a camp for children with disabilities and just found we couldn't get them into church.
Yeah.
And I had a little yell at God about it, and he said, well, actually I'd like you to do something about that. So that sort of planned my career path. So I trained to be a nurse, specialised in children with additional needs, disabilities, etc., and just remained that calling on my life to be an advocate for not just children, but teenagers and adults where there's additional needs and disabilities. And as a result of that, I co-founded the Additional Needs Alliance, my colleague Mark Arnold. I am chair of Children Matter. I serve on the Evangelical Alliance Council, and I have the hat of Additional Needs and Disability Consultant for Spring Harvest.
Wow, God has really got you busy.
Very busy.
Oh, wow. So what is autism then? Should we start from there? What do you feel?
Yeah, it's the thing that most people are asking about now, and it's probably within that whole statistic of what is a disability, it's one of the largest areas now. What I find is people know the myths about it. Very few people know what it really is. Now, could I just start on language? Because you may have a few people complain because of the way I word things. So I will say an autistic child. That is because everybody in the autism community prefers autism to come first, because for many it's their identity. And the person last. Whereas everybody else in society has had it drummed in them to say person with. But actually most people with a disability, especially autism, prefer it the other way around.
Really?
So you will hear me say that on purpose because my autistic friends have told me to do that.
Okay, that's the first time I'm hearing it, to be honest, yes. Because even in church where we are trained to say a child with autism, I think maybe because of the word SENS, special educational needs and disability, you're so fearful of putting that word, attaching it to a child. Okay, that's something to note. Okay.
So some people will like it differently, but as a rule.
Okay.
So if I tell you what some of the myths are.
Oh, please do. Please do. That's
some
what
people
we're learning together.
Yeah. Well, some people think it's catchy. It isn't.
Do you know, when I was in the nursery and I worked as a manager, we had a child with autistic, I'm trying to remember this now, autistic child. We had an autistic child in the nursery, and some parents would actually tell their child not to play with that
Yes.
autistic child
Yes.
because they thought it was catching.
Yeah.
And I think it's not really catching as in a virus, but they feel as if you start playing with that child and relating with that child, you tend to have the autistic nature come upon you. You know, you start behaving like a child. But I think that's the fear, really.
Yes.
Yeah. And they say it's not catching.
Absolutely. So it's known to lots, understood less. So some people say it's what you do or don't eat. You know, eat more kale, make sure they cut out additives and all that sort of thing. Actually, there's no difference. It doesn't make it any better or any worse. Some people have noticed a little bit of difference, but I think that's just based on the child and not the autism.
Okay.
It's nothing to do with vaccines.
That was a big myth.
Yeah.
It was. I know parents too, even in the nursery, the little nursery I was a manager to, some parents refused to take their vaccination because they felt as if that would, there was a link to autism.
Yeah. It's been proved beyond doubt now.
Okay.
So, the other thing is people put it down to bad parenting. It isn't. In fact, it's very specialist parenting, and sometimes the methods that some parents would use with their children would make autism a lot worse and make the reaction a lot worse. So it's very specific parenting. So all of those tuts and clucks that people give out in the shops, and especially in church, sadly, it isn't the parenting. It's the environment that causes the problem.
Yeah. And I think we'll be talking a little bit about the environment today, won't we?
We will. There isn't a cure. The majority don't want a cure because it's who they are. One of my goddaughters has autism. She's already said she doesn't want to be cured because it is who she is in all her glorious wonderfulness.
That is positive self-esteem.
Absolutely.
Oh wow, that must have been good parenting, having the parents having the knowledge to actually give that child the confidence to make that statement.
Yeah, but it's that you are made in God's image. You know,
True.
it doesn't stipulate whether you've not got a disability or have a disability. You are made in God's image regardless.
I love that phrase. Every child is made in God's image, and I think that's so important to bring across to every child, really.
Yes.
And that's where the confidence of knowing that autism does not define you. Yeah.
Absolutely. I have to put in here something on a spiritual footing, because many parents face this. Autism is not due to sin, either for themselves or any parents way back in history. It's not down to a lack of faith. And the thing that distresses them most is the amount of people that come up and either pray for their child's healing without permission or try to cast out a demon. And this happens a lot.
Sadly, it does.
It does. And it's hurtful, and it really does affect a child's self-esteem and also the parent as well. You know, as I keep saying, still made in the image of God, still capable of faith, still wonderful.
Yeah. And I think that is an attitude to have, especially because I am not mindful that miracles do happen. But in the time of waiting upon God, I think with that mentality that you've just spoken about, that look, this child is still made in God's image and is made for a purpose. And I think if you bring that across to a child constantly and not keep telling the child, you know, there's a problem with you, we've got to cast out this demon, we've got to pray for you to get better. Then if you keep using those words, get better, they begin to think, I'm sick, I have a problem.
Yes, I am not enough.
I'm not enough. True.
I think the one thing I would love to completely blast is the myth that people with autism have no compassion or empathy.
Oh wow.
A lot of people think that because of responses.
Yes.
But
I had a parent shout to the rooftop that my child has empathy. And he gave an example. He said one day He was in the kitchen, and I think something happened. Either he poured hot water on his hand, and he screamed, and the child came running out, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy, Daddy," and he says, "My child has empathy."
Yeah.
He reached out to me.
Yeah. Well, it's more than that. All of the children with autism that I know, and I know quite a lot,
They're quite sensitive.
they are sensitive to other people. So
It's just that sometimes it's just the way they express
it. Sometimes it can be so painful in realising the pain of another that they cannot find the words to express what that is.
Yeah.
And therefore that empathy gets internalised and can't be seen by everybody else. But then other people then translate that as no empathy. But they don't have the words or the social capacity to put it across. Especially as children, because they're still building up that vocabulary of what empathy is. If you can't name it, it's difficult to explain it.
Yeah, yes.
So,
and I think that is so important when working with children, because sometimes unknowingly or subconsciously some people tend to speak about the child when the child is there and present.
Absolutely. And
forgetting that that child does have feelings, even though sometimes he can't express it.
Yeah. There's a lovely lady that I've got to know on the internet who has twins with autism, and she explains the compassion of her daughter towards her brother who has other disabilities at the same time and has been very, very ill. And the way that she cares for him, loves him, and it is so obvious to see that empathy for him. And the way she speaks about other people with disabilities, not understanding why the rest of the world can't understand. And or she could teach the world an awful lot of things.
Sure.
She does.
I bet she does.
Yes.
Oh, well, thank you for those myths. Those are quite important nuggets to write down. Actually, I'm going to make sure I write those things down. There's something to remember.
Yeah.
Okay. And what has been, I mean, you have a wealth of experience, and because you wear so many hats, but what has been your experience of autistic children and their families in the church?
Quite a lot, in the fact that many parents and their families are turned away from church.
Yeah.
Myself and my colleagues regularly receive emails from parents that say, our church has just asked us to find another church because they can't cope. Sometimes they say it's health and safety. You know, no child is a health and safety risk. There's always another way. Sometimes it's we haven't got enough leaders. Sometimes it's your child is a safeguarding risk. They're not. I mean, a little later I'll talk about how we can be more welcoming to children with additional needs.
Yeah. And I think that's something teachers and parents would like to know.
Yeah. But it's that misunderstanding of the myths.
Yeah, that you just spoke about.
And it's fear, because it's something we don't understand. And it's fear of what other people are going to say and do. So, you know, another parent will say, I don't want my child in the group with that child. And how the church reacts to that is usually to ask the family to leave, not to educate the parent that wants the child removed. And when parents have been through this in schools, in clubs and everything outside of church, to walk into that place that should be a place of safety for them, it's absolutely awful. And that rejection, time after time after time. You know, it's, a lot of them say, they say, I can believe in God, but I can't believe in the church.
Yeah, that is true, sir. That is very sad. That is true. I mean, although I must say that now there is a lot of emphasis on training for trying to learn what is it all about, what is this all about. But still, I think it's still the lack of knowledge that has caused many parents to feel disheartened.
Yes, very much.
Yeah.
There's a large hidden church out there that don't actually go to a church.
So then what can we do? What can parents do to help?
Well, if you actually think of it, you've probably got a colleague somewhere that has autism you don't even know.
Yeah.
It's a hidden disability.
Can be.
Yeah.
Yes.
So for some it's more obvious than others. It isn't a learning disability. There are sometimes associated.
That is another myth.
Yes.
That is another myth.
It is.
When you say autism, you think, that child can't learn.
Yeah.
But it's not a learning disability.
No. So there might be an associated learning disability for another reason.
For another reason.
And there are many conditions that are attached to it, like ADHD, dyspraxia, various other things. Selective mutism, which I will explain in a moment. Not in any depth, but just to give an understanding. The best way to learn about autism is to actually speak to an autistic person.
True.
So everything I say today, I've heard from people who are autistic. They have been my trainers and my mentors in learning about it. Because of my own past, I have autistic traits, but that is just because of my past. There are certain elements, I'm adopted, all that sort of thing. A level of attachment disorder brings autistic traits. So I can understand some of it and have empathy, but I'm not autistic. So I sometimes, with a lot of this, will speak from the experience I've felt as well. So it's a difference in social communication. So we can read each other. So I can see what your face is saying, what your eyes are saying, what your body language is saying. A person with autism sees that, but they have to decode it. So we do it in a millisecond. They will take longer. Then they have to remember that social convention says they need to respond in this way.
True.
So I'm speaking adult here. And
the pressure.
Yeah. And it's stressful, it's really hard, and by the time we've got to the point of answering a question or responding, the person's given up and walked away, saying, autistic people don't interact.
And then that is where the self-esteem begins to diminish, because they've probably feeling, having a very low self-esteem, and the pressure of trying to communicate them, and then they start feeling as if, because they can't easily read a person, they probably just think the person doesn't like me.
Yes. Or not even that sort of, it's another, I don't fit in. But not each will have their own way of interpreting and the way they view what has just happened. It's very difficult to do, to explain. It's selective mutism. Sometimes the stress of having to speak shuts a child down to the point they choose not to speak in certain situations. They will speak well at home or in any place where they feel safe and understood, but put them into a church, a school, a busy situation, they won't speak.
That's important to note.
That was me before I went to school. I chose to not to speak in most situations because it was just too stressful.
But then sometimes in the environment now, that child is in so much pressure because they are, pointed at, you're sitting down there quiet, so they feel as if, yes, can you say something now? And then that's extra pressure.
Yeah. Why aren't you speaking? I just got labelled as an odd kid. Which was fine because it actually took the pressure off me. But response will be slow, and with children with autism, if we're asking questions, holding a conversation, we need to give that time for the child to understand, to form an answer, and just in their own way communicate back to us. That might not be with words.
That might not be with words.
So some children will use Manthano signing. Some will point to a picture board. There's lots of different ways a child will communicate.
Some who may even not be able to speak may even communicate with their eyes.
Yeah. You do learn how to read eyes very quickly. But when we say about eyes, some of the children I know quite often will say, what is this thing people have with staring at eyeballs? Because for some, eye contact is painful. And I don't know whether it's an understanding thing. This is where many of my autistic friends vary on what they're actually saying about eye contact. But in general, they don't like it. So I make myself do it, but I'm not comfortable with it.
Yeah.
So, but for many with autism, that wouldn't be possible.
It's important to note. Yeah.
Many children with autism, you will remember yourself, have special interests. So trains, history, really knowledgeable on it, and they will explain it and explain it again and explain it again.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's their comfort point, so where stress is coming out all over the place because they can't cope with the noise, the smell, the movement, the faces. To focus on that thing that really interests them is de-stressing. So de-stressing, not distressing. And it helps. But with that, it actually brings an attention to detail that most of us would be really jealous of.
True.
So set a task that is known and understood and well explained. The attention to detail would be amazing.
Wow. And I've seen that actually.
Yeah.
I've seen that because I have a nephew who is autistic, and his attention to detail when it comes to drawing is amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing. He can draw a building, and just the brick itself, he's putting it in there too. So,
So yeah, with work, teenagers find it difficult to find work if they declare they're autistic, and yet that young person is probably going to be one of their best employees because of that attention to detail once they know what's happening and their employers understand what they need. There you go.
That's important for a parent to note, because sometimes they can tell that to the employees that they're working, trying to seek work for their child for.
We need to know that predictability and routine is needed, and any change to that routine needs to be guided in advance with reason. It is changed because, and we're going to be doing this. So things like, when you change groups in your Sunday schools, it's not a case of, 1 week I'm in that group, but now I'm a year older, I've got to go to that group. We've actually got to prepare for that over weeks, and for some months.
Wow.
At Christmas, where we don't have the children's work, that's a changing routine. We need to prepare for it.
Wow. And that's something we often don't do, and yet if we don't know that a child is autistic, and then we're just changing the routine without an explanation, we're actually hurting that child.
It's actually helpful to every child in our programs.
Exactly. It is.
So to explain a few weeks in advance, we're changing this. Our midweek groups, sometimes we're going swimming this week, and thankfully we have people in our children's work that will say, okay, in this amount of time we're going swimming, and then working with the parents to put a social story around that.
Okay.
That's just something that prepares a child, that will tell a story that shows what's going to happen at that point.
Oh, that's something to note.
So do Google social story.
Okay.
It's very helpful.
Social story, alright. Okay.
And the Additional Needs Alliance has a lot of advice on that as well.
Alright, that's something to know. Yeah. So what does faith look like for an autistic child?
Sometimes different, sometimes exactly the same. So a lot of people at the faith side of it, and I've even had people come up to me and say, are you sure they can have a faith? Can they be Christians? I'm shocked that people even think that.
I think because some children can't respond to what we consider environment in which we place the children on a Sunday, and so as a result they can't learn. You know, you're talking, there's no feedback, you don't know what they're taking in, so you're like, can a child actually grow in faith?
If I say their God is just as big, their Holy Spirit is just as powerful, their faith is just as strong. It's just that it may look different.
Can you just say that again?
Their God is just as strong. Their Holy Spirit is just as powerful, and their faith, well, it's just real. In fact, sometimes more real than others. I find that children with autism are far more connected to spiritual things because their senses are such that they hear things before us, they smell things before us. Everything is heightened, you know, they'll hear the buzzing, the light in the ceiling, and we don't. But that applies to their spiritual standing as well. So at Spring Harvest, when I've been doing the children's work, the days where we're actually explaining the gospel in full and talking about having a faith of your own, these children are ahead of me. You know, sometimes it's because they don't understand this is the Spirit speaking, and they get quite restless. And I quite often say, when I see our children with autism getting restless, the Spirit's at work.
Yes.
You can see it.
Yeah. And I think that maybe, you know what scripture just came to me? Come to me as a child. I think that's the child part, because they don't have to reason it out. So they're so sensitive that the Holy Spirit can actually work with them. Wait,
can I tell you a really nice story?
Please.
I was working for a church weekend. I didn't know in advance that I had a young man with Asperger's. So,
what is Asperger's?
Well, people call it high functioning, but that's not a helpful phrase. So people think it's a lesser form of autism. It's still autism, but it's the way, now I might have this wrong, the way they respond is very different on one level, but they've still got the problems of the sound, the light, and everything. So children with Asperger's, I can have a full-on conversation with quite happily. And some people would not recognise that they're autistic. So, but it's not helpful. People think that these are kids with superpowers. Many are very intelligent, some aren't. But this young man arrived in our programme with a bit of a chip on his shoulder. So I'm autistic, I've got Asperger's, no one understands, God doesn't get me. So I said, that's absolutely fine. We welcome anybody in here, whether they believe in God or not. So just come in and have a good time. And his special interest was cars. And you could have an incredibly long conversation about any sort of car, what top speed was, what the problems were with it, etc., etc. And whenever I teach, I always give a time, because I know I'll have children that are autistic. I will give plenty of time for children to process what they're hearing, because it's also helpful to every other child in the programme. And that day we said, you can draw, you can write, you can just sit and listen to the music, ask God what you need to learn today. Let's ponder and think. And he just said, well, that's not going to work. I said, well, that's fine, just draw and ask God if he wants to speak. He might not today, he might tomorrow or the day after, the week after, whenever. But the important thing is you've spoken to him. And he sat and he drew a picture of a car, of course, with a number plate. And I looked at the number plate and thought, that looks like a car registration, but it also looks like a memory verse reference. So there's me sort of talking to God, saying, you better be right on this one, you know, because it's really scary, saying, now, shall we see if that's a Bible verse and see what it says? And it was from Psalms, where it talks about, you know, Psalm 139 being wonderfully made. And he left that programme that day, wham, straight into his mum, almost knocking her flying, saying, God gets my brain! And that understanding that, yes, his brain worked differently, but God saw his brain being formed in the womb and understood, and he was still just as precious. So yeah, that is something else. And I've seen that time after time.
That is a nugget for us, even as teachers and parents, to remember. Amazing. Oh, I love that story.
I do. I tell you
something for me to remember too.
I have others that come from there as well.
Oh, I wish we had all day.
Yeah.
So, how can we support discipleship then?
We need to know what the different things are that are going to make a child comfortable. So sensory processing is a problem. So as we teach, we need to be aware that certain things won't help our teaching and some things will help our teaching. So if we're in a room where they've got buzzy lights and there's other noise, and I know one child that was put off quite a lot because the air freshener in the toilet was so strong it was getting into the Sunday school room.
So you know, some of them are quite sensitive to smell.
So those small noises, those small smells, or in that case quite a large smell,
for that
will inhibit them from being able to take part. Allowing them to fiddle while we teach. Many children with autism, or autistic children, do what we call stimming. So they're actually reaching out for some sort of touch stimulation. So some will flap, some will scratch, pat, tap, some will count in their head. That was mine. I would count. When I was stressed, I would just count in my head. Nobody knew I was doing it.
Someone look through the window.
Yes, but they're still listening. They don't need eye contact with you to be listening. And again, that's the same with any child. You know, children that spin on the spot are probably listening better than that child that's sitting there with their arms folded.
Sure.
They're daydreaming.
Sure.
So don't take cues in the same way.
Every child is unique.
Carry on. If you've got a child that appears not to be connecting, then talk about your own journey in simple terms, or pose an I wonder question and say how you wonder with it, and then just allow them the space to wonder themselves as they build their Lego or they play with their train or whatever. A lot of the problem here comes from the fact that we expect all children to just sit there and look and listen. Whereas many are active learners. Some are listening learners, yes, but we need to be aware that especially children on the autistic spectrum, including things like ADHD, dyspraxia, will learn in different ways. I talk about using multisensory storytelling, so I'll use lots of things to tell a story. For children with more complex needs and autism that is really a struggle within that environment, I will tell a one-to-one story with them, handing them something that they can fiddle with while I'm actually telling that story. Our language has got to be clear and uncluttered, simple, short sentences, and concrete terms.
When you say concrete terms, I'm just trying to think of an example now.
The Bible is like a sword.
Yes. True. Yes.
What does that mean to a literal thinker?
What's that thinking? Jay would just believe what you've just said. The Bible is a sword.
Bang. I do remember a child interrupting a children's talk in church and going, "But they kill." And that is right. And the way we need to answer that question, or even stop that question coming, although why should we stop the question coming? Allow it. What we're saying is, swords are many things, but we're talking the good side of a sword. You know, you can cut a cake with it, and there are good things like that. You know, at a wedding, people use a sword to cut a cake quite often. So what we're saying is, it cuts through to the truth.
So explaining those complicated concepts sometimes,
So we're not saying it is a sword, we're saying some parts of it are like a sword. So we're explaining like that. But we like that sometimes with our, as children's workers, we like our visual aids, don't we?
Yes.
But sometimes our visual aid doesn't work all the way through to the end.
Yeah, like identifying the Holy Spirit like a dove. Dove, yeah.
So, and we sort of talk about, well, it's a bit like, and then we give this explanation, and it will be your child on the autistic spectrum that voices what the other kids are thinking. Actually, yeah, that works a bit. So we need to sort of say, it's like this, but I know it doesn't work as we work through. So actually name those issues with it. And say, but we're picking up on this little bit and how that helps us to understand. So it's not like, it's supporting our understanding.
Amazing. And I think that's also how parents also can ensure that even in their communication with their child, they make those make their words simple.
Yeah.
And also that thing about the sensory room, it's a big buzz. I mean, even as you're speaking, I'm thinking, sometimes that's what people's solution as to, how to support children.
Yeah.
An autistic child is just create a sense.
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work. It will not work.
Yeah.
But just on what you've just shared, I'm thinking, not every child would like those lights.
Some will.
Some,
Not every child with autism hates noise. I know some autistic children that love the drums. I know many more that hate them, but I know some that just want to be on the platform with the worship band. And that is great. The key is knowing our children. So if we know our children well, we'll know that child, if they need Timeout, sensory room is not the place. So they're melting down because of the noise, the movement, and all of that sort of thing. So to put them in a place where there's lots of light, sound, moving things.
Nice.
Yeah. So I quite often say, have your multi-sensory box. So keep it in a box and have your quiet space. But bring out what is needed for that child. So if they need something that's more in your face, bring that out of the box. But generally, people haven't got space for that. And I quite often say, we're going to pop up a tent, put a blanket over the top. Don't have anything in there, but put it in when the child goes in there. So if you've got a child who loves trains, just put a train in there with them. If they love Lego, put some Lego in there.
Amazing, that's true. That's for some people that will say we have no space. A pop-up tent.
Just a pop-up tent at the back of the room. But it's their space. And have a plan in place and say, that will be your space if you need it. You can use it whenever. Give me a signal. Just have a word or a hand signal that says, I need that space. So they can either be taken or go themselves. In that space, they are in charge. But get the parents to work with the child to know that if their child is in danger, they will need to bring that child out and out of danger. So that is always in there, because if you've got a fire alarm or something else, the fire alarm is enough to cure a meltdown, but then somebody coming into their space is another cue. So as long as they know when they're in a calm place, that when they are not in a calm place, the only interruption will be to keep them safe. Because we have to think health and safety and safeguarding. And if they want to put the flat down and zip it up, yes. A lot of people say, I can't do that, safeguarding. So whether the child is the only person in the tent, it's fine. Gain permission to just go along and say, are you okay?
Okay, yeah.
And as long as they know that's coming, that's fine. It's caring. Now, on the same thing, some people say that inclusion is everybody in the room together. Inclusion is being what a child needs at a moment in time. So if a child at a moment in time needs to be completely separate, that is still inclusion.
That still is inclusion. Amazing, yeah.
So it helps. Very helpful actually in all of this and keeping a child settled is a visual diary.
Okay.
So it's just, Google it and you'll see lots of examples. And making it clear what's going to happen when, and preparing. So if you've got an activity followed by a song followed by a story, when you start the activity you're pointing out that after that is a song, and after the song you're pointing out there's a story. Sorry, as soon as the song starts you're pointing out there's a story. So they always know what is coming next. If you say in a minute, they will time the minute. So don't use a time thing. And if you say you're going to get their parent or guardian, do it instantly. Because if you say, right, I'm going to get your parent, and you get waylaid by 10 minutes, they're going to, where's my parent? So it has to be instant so they know what you say is truthful and you're going to do it. Now all of that lays a great foundation, and there's a lot more, which is why you need to Google autism and find out all of these things. Come to the Additional Needs Alliance, I've got this information. But it lays a groundwork for a child to be comfortable to hear from God.
And that's how to disciple the child.
The problem with discipleship, it's all word-based, reading-based, go and read this book, rather than face-to-face and mentoring-based. You can mentor from the earliest of ages.
Yes, you can. In fact, even while you're in your mother's womb.
Absolutely, pray over them, read to them from the Bible, and sing over them.
Hey, and you know, they are not seeing you, but they're still sensitive.
Yeah.
And that phrase that you just said, that God is bigger.
Yeah.
Oh.
As a child, I won't go into my circumstances, but before I was born, I can recollect arguments going on around me. And, you know, having talked to my birth mother about it, I know that what I am remembering is that time in the womb. So, yeah, these things are important. Yeah, so it's really important. So I write down lots of notes because it helps me.
Oh, wow.
I always wonder what your vision is for the children with additional needs in your groups, especially with autism. But ask parents what their vision is for their child. You'll be surprised. You know, sometimes our vision is to get through to the end of the programme without a child having a meltdown.
It's been my vision sometimes. Yes.
Yeah. But our overriding vision is something that could revolutionise the way we look at the way these children learn, the way we disciple, the way we mentor. You know, we said that about their God is just as big, their Holy Spirit is just as powerful. If our vision is to introduce children to Jesus, for them to grow in their faith and walk their path with Jesus, to grow a resilient lifelong faith, then when we're actually looking for someone to help and buddy these children, we're not going to them going, we need some help to come and sit on this kid that is disturbing the other children. I've heard that.
Yes, well,
we're going and saying, we've got a huge vision for this child, but we need help to introduce him to Jesus. We don't expect you to teach, but actually friendship is of higher importance in teaching our children faith, because it's modelling that faith. Can you come and help us? So a vision is just so important. So have a vision of discipleship, of mentoring, of faith, and pass it on to your whole team.
Yes, that's so true. That is so true. Wow, okay, I could sit here all day long.
Yes, I think we've already gone over time, haven't we?
But oh wow, thank you ever so much for your time. Most definitely you're coming to Teach Me conference to speak again. Oh yes. Well, it's been amazing, and thank you ever so much for you.
Thank you for asking me.
Yeah. Wow, I'm sure like me, you found this topic very, very interesting. I learned so much. I've got my notes here, and yes, things such as the myths, learning moments, that that teaching a child that you are made in God's image is so, so important, especially with autistic children, because sometimes as we interact with them, we may feel led to pray with them. But remember, even while praying with them, it's so important to instill that you are not different. You are no different from any other child. Every child is unique and important to God and can be used by God. She talked about the thing that autism is not a learning disability. So it's so important as parents and as teachers that we find out what the child's skill is. What is it that they enjoy? What is it that they like doing? For some children, it may be very difficult. Yes, we do understand that. But for some, it is. We can learn that. We can find that out through either asking a parent or even through our relationships with the child, because she did share a lot about how in relationships and the environment is important, and the importance of having routine and structure in our environment. That again is so, so important. Were you amazed about the sensory box, and also that the sensory room is not always the answer? I was. And how we can use the sensory box to support a child's needs. She talked again also about having a visionary box and a social story, and also she referred a lot to the Additional Needs Evangelical Alliance website, where we can get a lot of information there too. So I'm sure like me, you will go back to this video and listen to it again and again. I'm so glad you did take time to listen to this video, and yes, remember, we are here to support. We're here to serve you, support, equip, resource, value, and empower you. So please do subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can get notifications of our next video. We do these videos on a monthly basis, so we look forward to having you next month. You can also refer to our website. You'll get a lot of information there, and also we do a lot of training. So till we meet again, enjoy, and God bless you. Bye.